Hi, I'm Steve Fisher, and welcome to Electronic Percussion. The purpose of this video is to give you some good experience on electronic percussion, some of the equipment that's involved, and a lot of some of the applications that's also involved with it. As most of you know now, electronic percussion isn't a luxury or really an option. It's really very mandatory for working drummers. So in this video, we're going to cover a lot of different things, and I think you're going to enjoy it. I think we'll have a lot of fun with it as well. Electronic percussion opens up a lot of new creative possibilities through the vast amount of sounds that we can obtain and we can play. But one of the most important things about electronic percussion, some of the philosophy behind that, is that electronic percussion, drums and percussion, are their own instrument. They're a separate instrument. Electronic percussion was never meant to take the place of acoustic drums and percussion. Just to give you a parallelism with that, it's just like an acoustic piano player. His other instrument is a synthesizer. The weighted action keys are different. The sounds that are produced are different. Actually, the same thing with a guitar player. An acoustic guitar player playing a 12-string acoustic guitar, his other guitar instrument is, for instance, an electric Stratocaster with a whammy bar on it. It's still a guitar, but yet it's a totally different instrument. It's approached differently, it's played differently, and it sounds very different as well. With electronic percussion, there's three basic elements that are involved in producing the sounds. Those three things are, first, the sound module, second, the interface, and third are the controllers. In this case, on this drum kit, the pads are our controllers. This is where we control the sound from. Since we are manipulating the sound from here, it's very important to get used to the feel of the pads and how they respond. So one of the first things I recommend that you do is to take the volume off so there's no sound at all, and actually just take one single pad and practice doing your warm-ups, doing rudiments, whatever you feel comfortable doing, so you actually get the feel of the pad and how it responds, the rebound and whatnot. So it's actually good to do that. Just practice some of your rudiments on a single pad. Once you get the feel of the pad, it's obviously very important in a drum set style configuration like we've got here to actually set the pads up so you feel comfortable playing them. Now, unlike an acoustic drum set where you've got physical size limitations, I mean obviously for a floor tom-tom, that drum has to be that big to produce that sound. In this case, it doesn't have to. My floor tom-tom, or I'll assign the sound of a floor tom-tom, is still going to be this small pad here. One of the differences is with these pads, so you can place them as close or as far away as you want to. Now it's funny, these pads do look a little bit small, but one of the interesting things, if you look at your drum heads at all, there's actually about a 4 or 5 inch radius diameter that you actually played in with kind of your sweet spot, so to speak. And that's about 95% of your drum strokes are played in that area. These pads are 7.5 inches wide, which is plenty to be able to hit. So configuring them is very important, and what you want to do is get them set so you're comfortable with it. One of the things you might want to do that I would suggest is actually, do you get them set up, again, without the sounds on, just play, and as a matter of fact, even play some of your drum set licks and whatnot and with the sounds off, and close your eyes. So that way you'll know if you've got the right reach for all your things. So now what you want to do is obviously turn on the sounds and be able to manipulate the sounds. Listen how that's going to sound. Now that we're used to the pad configuration, I'm going to turn up the volume here, and now we should be able to play the sounds. I've got called up just a regular drum set sound for us to manipulate. And the next process, then the next step is to go ahead and just play to those sounds. One of the great things about these pads, the Roland pads here, if you'll notice, the pads are our controllers, if you remember. They're dual trigger pads. So I actually get 2 sounds per pad. For instance, one of the great things, especially for the snare drum, is be able to play a rim shot, as you can see here. And that's very natural to be able to play and hit that rim shot. And I'm actually hitting the rim and the head at the same time, so it's very natural. Same thing with the pads. I can get the bell of the cymbal by hitting the rim. Or I can, over here, the crash cymbal, I've got a crash on the head and a China type for the rim shot. One of the other great things about these pads as well, what's very unique, is the ability to actually choke a sound. In this case, actually the crash cymbal. And that's great, because that kind of control that we have, being able to play rim shots, choking cymbals and whatnot, is very natural playing technique. Obviously, you can choke your acoustic cymbals. You've learned how to do that, and you can apply it right here to this electronic kit. So you can see down here on the bass drum configuration that we've got, I'm using just my bass drum pedal that I'm comfortable with, and it's simply just a matter of adapting the funny style beater. It's actually kind of reverse style beater. I've pulled out my traditional beater and put in the beater that mounts in from the bottom. Thus I can hit the bass drum trigger in that fashion. I actually have double bass drums set up at this point for being able to play different styles and whatnot. The last point here that's on the drum set that's a controller for me is actually the hi-hat pedal. And this is very unique. It's actually really kind of a breakthrough for being able to control the hi-hat. You can see here, just listen as I play some of the different points of the hi-hat. I've got closed, open, all the variations in between, pedal hi-hat, and even the heel kick hi-hat. So with that kind of control, we can use all our natural playing techniques to be able to play the electronic drum kit. Everything's going to feel very comfortable and very natural to play. So our controllers that are in place here are great controllers. And another thing to do with the controllers, once more, is also the sensitivity of those controllers. Now, for instance, you saw me playing the snare drum and playing some rolls and whatnot. The sensitivity is very important because, again, we're manipulating the sound. For example, you can take a listen to the snare drum as I play some of the sensitivities. For instance, if I didn't have sensitivity, I actually have a patch here that I actually don't have any sensitivity at all. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like and sounds like, it's kind of different because no matter how hard I strike the pad, the sound's going to remain the same level of volume. So obviously that has its application that we'll talk about, but to be able to have that other kind of sensitivity is really incredible, and that's what you really want to look for. Once we have our sounds in place, one of the big advantages that we have with electronic percussion is the ability to have numerous amounts of sounds. I mean, it really pretty much is endless when you're in the electronic medium. The module here, this is the Roland TD7 module that comes with this drum kit, actually has over 500 sounds, and it's a wide variety of sounds. Now, the important thing with that is they're grouped into actual drum kits. Just like a synthesizer player will play his Rhodes patch, and he can hit a button and play his brass patch, and hit a button and play, a vibraphone patch. We have the same ability here, but with different drum set configurations. What's important, though, is when you call up different drum kits and different groups of sounds, you need to be able to play to those sounds. You can't play every single sound the way you would just normally play a drum set, because obviously things won't sound right. Just for kind of a drastic example, you wouldn't play, for instance, a sound that I've got here, which is kind of a techno type of sound, I wouldn't play for a jazz style. For example, you can listen to the difference, how funny this would sound if I was going to use this particular patch with a jazz type style. That just doesn't sound right. I mean, that's not correct. So one of the things you want to be able to do, I happen to have a drum kit here that's called up that does say jazz. Obviously, then that's going to be able to work for my jazz styles and those sounds. So you can hear, obviously, the sounds fit the styles, and that's very important. As a matter of fact, what we're going to do here is I'm going to have the band play along with me. One of the first things, well, obviously, that we'll cover is even like a 50s rock thing. One of the great things, some of the sounds in here, I've got a set of drums that sounds like an old set of drums. You can take a listen to them here for a moment. I mean, you can even hear the tom-toms still sound like you've still got the duct tape left on them. So with that sound in mind, we're going to go to the band and actually play. We're going to play like a 50s rock type style. The next example that I'm going to have the band play with me on is just a straight-ahead rock and roll type of style. It's not an old rock and roll. It's not the brand new stuff, heavy metal things, but just real straight-ahead, kind of a gutsy rock and roll. So I can call up any one of my drum kits that just has a little bit heavier sound that I'm going to play to. I obviously wouldn't play a sound like this again with a jazz type thing or a couple other styles that I could name, but for all intents and purposes, this is actually what the drum kit sounds like when you hear played with the band example. The next style that we're going to go to is the heavy metal style, heavy metal rock and roll. So in my drum kit here in the TD7 module, I'm actually going to pull up a drum kit that's really heavy. It's got a big, thick sound. The bass drum is big and it's live, and that's the kind of sound you obviously want to use for that style. So before we actually, the band and I play, I'll give you another listen to what the sound of this drum kit sounds like. So here it is with the band. Staying in the rock idiom, so to speak, the next style that's obviously with rock and roll that really hasn't been covered is kind of the speed metal, the thrash metal, you know, the real fast playing. So with that, it's a different kind of drum kit. You don't want to use those real big, fat, thick sounds because you want to be able to play fast, and those sounds will kind of muddy together a little bit. So I actually have another drum kit with a lot of guts to the kick drums and the snare drum, and I'll give you a listen to that also. This is the drum kit that's used in the next band example. And here it is with the band. The next example that we're going to do with the band is actually a country type of style. And one of the things I've got called up here, I've got actually one of the drum kits in the TD7 is called Nashville. So we're going to do a little country thing, so to speak. And again, playing to that style, playing to that sound. One of the things that's also going to be interesting here is that the guitar player, Michael Higgins, has a Roland guitar synthesizer, and he's actually going to be playing the fiddle part. So listen for that, as well as Todd Carlin, the keyboard player, is actually going to be playing the banjo part, which makes things very interesting. So my part, though, is to get that kind of country-type snare drum, that deeper type of sound, and I'm going to play more of a traditional type of train beat. So I'll kind of give you an idea of that here. So here it is with the band. next style we're going to cover is more of a funk type of style, and I actually have a drum kit in here that's called Funk that sounds actually sounds very good. It's very expressive. Gives that more of a funk type of sound, kind of with a snapping snare drum. The tom-toms are a little bit deadened, and obviously you want to play towards that style again. I obviously wouldn't use a drum kit like this for the heavy metal section. So here's a listen to the drum kit that I'll be using in this next example. And here it is with the band. Now this next style that I'm going to be playing with the band is kind of a medium tempo swing. And one of the things that's a lot of fun to play with that is brushes. I've got a lot of great brush sounds here in the Roland TD7. But one of the things is, again, you have to manipulate to the style. Now obviously these are gum rubber pads, and I can't take a brush out and start stirring on a rubber pad. That obviously doesn't work. So you have to start to manipulate the sound to make it sound like I'm stirring. Well, one of the sounds I have in the module is actually a hit and a swish. And it sounds like this, that I'll use on the head of the snare drum. And that gives me actually the idea of stirring while I'm playing that swing rhythm with my right hand. Now, what I've also done is we also have kind of a slap brush sound for the rim shot. Remember, our pads are dual trigger pads, so we can play 2 sounds per pad. And that's obviously very effective for giving us the slap brush hit as well. Now, if I integrate that with just playing our good old-fashioned hi-hat here, I have the sound of jazz brushes hitting the tom-toms and the ride cymbal. You get an effect that sounds something like this. With that in mind, I'll be playing the jazz brush kit in this next example with the band, just again playing a medium swing style. The next example is actually going to be more of a fast swing type of style, and for that I'm obviously going to move away from the brushes and just play a jazz kit, just straight ahead jazz kit, kind of a nice sounding snare drum, open sounding tom-toms, and again, very important to keep with that jazz style, playing that jazz style. This is actually what the drum set sounds like by itself. And here's what it sounds like with the band. The next style we're going to go to is a Latin type of style, and for that I'm obviously going to pull up a lot of my different Latin percussion instruments. Bongos, conga drums, shakers, cowbells, things like that, guiro sound. And what's interesting about playing electronic percussion, again, is kind of anything goes. You can assign any sound you want to any pad or to any of the foot pedals down here. What makes this one a little bit unique is that, for example, I'm going to have a cowbell on my hi-hat, and I'm going to have a shaker on my bass drum. So just to give you a little idea of some of the sounds that I've got here before I actually play the rhythm, here's what I've got here. Now with all these sounds that we've got here, the next step, again, is playing in the correct style. It's very important to be able to know all these different styles, and especially when it comes to Latin percussion rhythms, it's important to know, for instance, this next band example that we're going to do, I'm going to play like a cha-cha type of pattern. It's very important to know the authentic cha-cha pattern style that's used on a conga drum, and also how some of the instruments are played so you can emulate those. And that way it comes off sounding very authentic instead of sounding like someone just playing a whole bunch of Latin percussion instruments just at random. So this is actually the beat that I'm going to be using for this next band example, and this will give you a good idea on how I'm manipulating all the different instruments using all four of my limbs. And here's that same rhythm played with the band in context with an actual type of cha-cha style pattern. The next example that we're going to be doing is playing a Mambo type style pattern, and for that what I'm going to do is really just use a basic drum set type setup, but I want the cowbell in there as well. And something that's comfortable for me, obviously, is just playing the ride cymbal up here. I'm going to assign the cowbell up where the ride cymbal is. It's easy for me to get to, it's comfortable to play up there. And again, we're in the electronic medium, so anything goes. If you want where you normally had your ride cymbal, a cowbell, so be it. So up here I've got my cowbell, and I'm going to play more of an authentic type of style mambo, again keeping within those traditional styles. So this is basically the pattern that's going to be used that you'll hear with the next example. And here's that same pattern played with the band. The next style that we're going to be doing is actually a reggae type style. Actually, the beat that I'm going to be using is more of kind of like a Stuart Copeland Police type thing with all four kick drums on all the beats. But what I've done with my sounds, I actually called up a reggae snare drum sound, which is pretty unique. You can use timbales, which I also have assigned here. But on the rim of my snare pad, I actually have a cross stick, and then the snare head, I have assigned a reggae snare, an authentic reggae snare. So, which sounds something like this. And here's what this drum kit sounds like with the band. The next style I'm actually going to do just with the keyboard player, Todd Carlin. And he's going to be playing a string patch, and what we're going to do is more of an orchestral type of feel. So he's going to be playing strings and some rich, warm cello sounds and contrabasses and whatnot. And what's interesting, again, for this is where, again, playing electronic percussion, you can go hog wild and assign any sound you want to any of the pads. For example, I've got my concert snare drum that's right here. And again, with a rim shot. I have my concert bass drum for my bass drum, and you'll notice I have a muted concert bass drum and a much longer decay bass drum as well. And that's actually dependent on how hard I actually hit the bass drum pedal, as you can see here. And obviously you probably want a good set of hand cymbals, and what I've actually done is assigned the hi-hat pedal to play the hand cymbals. Again, we probably want some other percussion here. I've got triangle sounds, woodblock, castanets, tambourine, things like that. And what's interesting again, with the ability with these pads to be able to choke pads and use your hands to mute things, the triangle becomes very natural to play, muting and unmuting a triangle sound. And we have our woodblock sound, our castanets over here, tambourine. Now what's also interesting is I also want to have timpani in there, which I can do. It's easy for me. I've assigned the tom-toms all to be timpani. What's also interesting about that, since again we're in the electronic medium, one of the things I can do is instead of the hi-hat pedal being actual hand cymbals, I can also have the hi-hat pedal be, for instance, like pitch bend for a timpani. So I've got my timpani over here on my first tom-tom, and I can actually use the hi-hat pedal to also manipulate pitch. So again, besides the hand cymbals, I have the ability to control pitch. So with the ability of those sounds, you can hear some of them sounding together, sounds something like this. So you get the idea. So with those sounds in mind, here's the next example, played again just with the keyboard player in an orchestral type of style. Some of the other sounds that weren't covered with the band examples, again, when you're playing electronic percussion, really anything goes. You've got so many sounds at your disposal. One of the things you can also do, obviously, is even play melodic percussion type sounds as well off the different pads. So you even have melodic percussion sounds you can use, and you can spread apart all over the different pads. A couple other sounds also that you can do, actually it sounds more like people think electronic percussion. You can actually go and play more of even drum machine type of sounds. This is a very popular sound. It's actually from the Roland TR-808 drum machine. All the rap sounds and things like that come from this. And instead of programming a drum machine, you can actually now just play it from an electronic drum kit, which sounds something like this. You've got sounds like that. You even have things like the more current things, which are like the dance sounds, which actually come from an older drum machine called the Roland TR-909 drum machine, and it's all used for all the dance type things. This is actually that patch that I played earlier that doesn't have the velocity sensitivity, so that really gives me the sound of sounding like a drum machine, because those older drum machines didn't have that velocity sensitivity. They're all one level, one volume level. And obviously it's very effective if you're going to be playing that. And what's interesting about that is, if you think about it, before everyone was complaining, oh, drum machines are taking the place of drummers, and drum machines are trying to emulate drummers. What's interesting now is that drummers now are emulating drum machines, which is kind of ironic. A couple other sounds also, some more contemporary type of sounds, hip hop, things like that, you can obviously play. So you've got sounds like that. You even have, even if you want to even get into robotic type sounds, you can play those as well. So you make it sound very machine-like. So you even have those kind of sounds as well, which are not only interesting, but they're a lot of fun to play as well. There's a couple other sounds also that you can do. Again, with melodic percussion, you can also integrate some of those things. I actually have some guitar sounds in here and some other unique sounds. And it's kind of fun. You start to create your own rhythms and even your own melodies. You start to think of things that way. So you can have a lot of fun integrating all those sounds, orchestra hits and guitars and all those things like that, which make electronic percussion playing quite a bit of fun, just to have that many sounds at your disposal. With the variety of sounds that we have, one of the things that's interesting to know is how those sounds are developed or what they're actually from. There really is two basic kinds of sounds that's really taking place here. There's sample-based sounds and there's synthesized type sounds. For example, the synthesized type sounds sound like the traditional what people used to think of electronic drums. They're made from actual waveforms and things like that, and they sound synthesized, something like this. That's more of a synthesized type of sound. Now, if you're going to go to what's called a sample-based type of sound, sample-based sounds are just that. They're actual samples of real drums that's been put in the module here. So it's an actual sample of a snare drum, actual sample of tom-toms, and that's where things start sounding very realistic. Because and for this drum kit that I've got called up here, they're very real type of sounds. And you can hear the realism in those sounds, so that's a big difference. One of the things when you actually go to looking to buy sound modules and looking for sound quality, one of the best things you can do, there's a couple things actually. First of all, listen to those sounds through a good audio system. If you're in the market for buying them, it's always good to compare two modules that you might be looking for, two different sounds. Put them right next to each other and listen to both of them. Another great thing to be able to do is you should also have yourself a really good set of headphones that you keep with you all the time, that you use, because that's your reference to how things sound. Because you might go into one place and it sounds great because they've got this great sound system, whereas that same module, that same sound source might not sound very good in another environment. So if you bring your own headphones, you've got your own reference with you all the time, no matter what you listen to. There's a couple things also, just while you're looking at sounds and whatnot. There's specifications, and I know this is very popular. People say 12-bit, 16-bit, 8-bit sounds, things like that. What usually takes place, we're not going to get into it, but the higher the bit resolution, the higher the quality of sound. These sounds here are 16-bit quality, and that's very good. The sample rate and whatnot is clear as any kind of audio CD that you'd go purchase at a store. So that's important as far as those kind of specifications go. One of the other things you do when you listen to sounds, it's very important to listen to the clarity of the sound as well. Because sometimes specifications don't really tell you a lot, even though they might say 16-bit and whatnot. So it's really good to use your ear, and again, using your own personal monitoring system, which is a good set of headphones. It's worth the investment. Listen to sounds. A couple of sounds you might want to listen to are things like the ride cymbal. Listen to the clarity of the ride cymbal. Listen to the realism of it. Also listen, you can hear what's called loops when they sample. If you were to play a ride cymbal or a crash cymbal and had a bad loop, it'd sound like, wah, 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 as it would decay. So if you can listen to this ride cymbal, you can tell this is a good ride cymbal sample. So you can hear it's a good clear sample. There's a lot of realism there. There's a lot of presence, and that's very important. Another thing you probably want to listen to are sounds like conga drum sounds, that conga drum slap and the open sounds. I mean, you should be able to hear the guy's hand on the drum. It should sound that clear. If it sounds muffled, doesn't sound right, then you might want to look onward. So that's very important. Those kind of sounds are important to use as a reference for picking out a good sound source. One of the other great advantages and one of the important elements to sound is what's called signal processing. You might have heard that term before. What signal processing actually is, it's reverb, delay, chorus, and flanging. What reverb does, reverb is probably the most important one for us to be able to use. What reverb does, it gives us the sound of that we're maybe in a larger room or we're in a concert hall, things like that. For example, if I've called up one of my drum kits here that doesn't have any signal processing on it, what's also called a dry sound. So there's no effects on it at all. And this is actually what it sounds like. So you can hear it's very dry sounding. Now I've got another drum kit here that I've called up that has reverb on all the different drums. And you can hear the difference. It sounds like I'm in a huge concert hall. You can hear how much bigger those sounds are and how much more alive those sounds sound like. Now, one of the things that is important to be able to do if you are going to go into signal processing is the ability to be able to change how much signal processing is on there, on your different instruments. So, for instance, I don't want to put this big wash of reverb on everything. I might want to have a dry kick drum, or, for instance, let's say I don't want reverb on one of my sounds. It's important to have different effects processing levels for each instrument. For example, I can take the reverb off this tom-tom. And I can adjust how much reverb I want on each of those. So you can hear that. One other factor, though, that's involved is even just with reverb, there's a couple different kinds of reverb that you can actually hear. There's hall reverb, which is on this drum kit now, which sounds like we're in a concert hall. There's also a room reverb, which makes it sound like you're in a room. Something like that. And then there's also a plate reverb. Plate reverb is especially good to use on especially a lot of percussion sounds. It's a little bit brighter and it makes the percussion sounds stick out. You can hear the high end in that reverb and the effects a little bit. So those are the three different types that we've got. We've got hall, room, and plate reverbs, and different amounts of those, obviously. Again, one of the other things we have the ability to also have delay. And delay is obviously very good to use, and it's a great effect to use for doubling and things like that. And you can obviously hear that, that effect right here that I've got on that snare drum. And that's delay, and you can adjust the different amounts of it as well. There's another thing too, there's also chorusing and flanging, which are very similar. And what those can do for you is really pretty extraordinary. You can actually take a drum set, I'm going to take my tom-toms and put a lot of flanging on them and some chorusing on there. And what that gives me, it gives me a much bigger sound. And you can also hear the sound changing as the decay goes on. And you can hear that sound changing as the decay happens. It makes the sound absolutely huge, which is great. So effects processing is very important, and again, it's a basic element to our sound, and it is obviously a big advantage to be able to adjust the different amounts of those. Now, I know that sounded like an awful lot of sounds all at one time, and that's one of the things you can actually do if you're going to go do what's called sound layering, which means we can actually layer sounds on top of each other, obviously giving us the essence of sounding like we're playing more than one sound. Now, what's interesting is in sound layering, there's a couple different forms of sound layering that you can use, again, to manipulate the sounds with the pads. What we're going to deal with here is actually dealing with velocity, which is how hard we're actually going to hit the pad. There's different ways the sound can come in when we hit the pad soft versus getting louder. For example, one of the first forms of sound editing that we can do, as I go into sound edit here, one of the things that I'm going to show you here is one of the first things is just velocity mixing, is just the mixing of those two sounds. So if I hit it soft, I'm going to use an example here of just a snare drum and a bell sound. Now I can hit it soft and we hear both, and if I hit it loud, we hear both sounds. And with velocity from loud to soft, we still hear both sounds. Now there's different ways of doing that. That's one. So that's actually just velocity mixing. One of the things that we can actually do with velocity mixing is also make it so the harder I hit it, it'll bring in the bell sound. So we velocity mix the bell sound. So that bell sound comes in the louder we play. Now there's another form of being able to layer, and that is called velocity switching. So the sound is actually going to switch. The louder I play, I'll get to a certain threshold, and as I play louder, the sound will switch to that bell sound. So we have the snare drum sound at a lower velocity, and as I play louder, it switches to the bell sound. That's the second form of that. Now the third one is actually called velocity crossfade. And what that actually does, it gives me the sound of, I have a snare drum at a low volume, the bell sound at a low volume. Now the difference being is that as I play louder, those sounds will smoothly mix into each other. So unlike velocity switching, which was kind of a hard switch from one sound to the other, the louder I play, the snare drum gets softer, but the bell sound gets louder, thus velocity crossfading into each other. So those are our three forms: velocity mixing, velocity switching, and velocity crossfading. And that's how you can actually go about getting all those complex sounds all at the same time. There's a lot of great applications for playing electronic percussion, especially when you play a full electronic drum kit. One of the first things is actually recording. Even the videotape that you're hearing now, all the drum sounds have been recorded, have just gone out a stereo output out of the module. As you can clearly see, there's no microphones, and we have discrete control over all the different sounds. Through the module, we have almost like a mixing console. We've got levels and whatnot for the sound. And we also have, again, the effects processing and levels of that per each sound. So as far as recording, we can take this drum kit anywhere and go record anywhere we want to. And obviously setting it up is easy, and getting the sounds to happen, the good sounds to happen right away, is very easy. One of the other applications is playing live. As you can see, the kit is very portable, it's very lightweight, and it compacts and packs up in a very small space. So for portability's sake, it's a great advantage. The other thing that you might want to be aware of for live playing is your monitoring system. I would recommend, if you're going to be monitoring this drum kit, that you probably might use a floor monitor or whatnot, with at least a two-way with maybe a 15-inch woofer to move some air and a horn. The other thing you can do, though, if you don't care to carry around a sound system with you, is actually just use the headphone output out of the module and put on a set of headphones. Now you might be wondering, in a live situation like a club or whatnot, how you're going to hear the rest of the band. Well, conveniently enough, there's actually an auxiliary input in the back of this module that will take any kind of audio type of send. So if your mixing board up front has a submix of what the band is hearing, what the band is playing, you can come into the back of the module and through the headphone output hear yourself and the band. So that's a great advantage also to live playing, not to mention because we've got all the great sounds that are involved. So you can go from drum kit to drum kit, from style to style, and it's like having 32 different drum kits, so to speak, with you all at the same time. The The third application for playing an electronic drum set like this is obviously practicing. Since it is a full electronic drum set and we do have our headphone output, what that means is that we can practice any time of day or night. You can put on a set of headphones and you can blow your brains out and your neighbors won't even know it. So playing all the cymbals and hi-hat, and that's all integrated, and you can practice any time you want to. So that's a great advantage to be able to have. One of the other things that we can also do through practicing, again using that auxiliary input in back, we can maybe have our CD player or a tape player, and we can feed that signal in through the back of the module. So through my headphones I hear my CD player and me playing drums, which is a great practice tool. Another great practice tool that's actually built in to this module is a built-in sequencer or built-in recorder style. It's kind of like a digital tape recorder. You can think of it as that. And what that allows us to do is be able to record our own parts. I push the record button and I can start playing into the sequencer, and it will record everything that I play. Now if I want to erase that, that's very easy to do. I push the erase button and play the pads that I played on, and it will erase that. Now as you heard that metronome playing, what we could also do, besides not playing into it, is just have the metronome going, which obviously is good for practicing. But if you're practicing and you know there's only one problem with that metronome, let's use an example here. I'm going to play something that's just being played off of triplets, and just try to hear the metronome going as I play it. Now, even though I might have come in on a click, I really don't know whether I came in on 1 or 2 or 3. I might have come in right on a click, but that doesn't tell me I came in on 1. And what's unfortunate about that is you usually find that out at the gig that night when you try to pull one of those kind of clever licks, and the bass player and the keyboard player turn around to you and say, sorry, that was 2, not 1. So one of the great things we have in here, which is a tremendous practicing tool, is a talking metronome. And I'll let you hear that.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes, she'll count up to 7 if you want her to, actually.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
She'll even count 1 and 2 and. It's a great practice tool. So using that same example again, I'll actually play that same example but with the talking metronome. That way I'll know that I come in on 1.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
So you get the idea. And also for playing in odd time signatures, it's also very useful for that. So a tremendous practice tool that you can use any time of day or night as well. Now that we've got our sequencer happening in the module, one of the things that we can do is not only just add drum set parts and percussion, but again we've got all our melodic percussion sounds. We have bass sounds and guitar sounds and all those different types of sounds that we can sequence. And what's great is you can put those all together, make a sequence, and then I can actually start and stop a sequence from any pad or any rim that I want to. In this case, I've got one sequence starting from this rim and another sequence starting from the second rim. Something like this. So you can hear those two different sequences, and I can use it to play along with. What's also convenient is the lights flash on the front of the panel that lets me know where the beats are, which is great to also watch, kind of a visual metronome in that sense. So you get the idea, a lot of fun there. There's also another way we can also sequence, and that is instead of me following the sequencer, I can have the sequencer follow me. So one of the things I can do, in this case, I've got an orchestra hit, and instead of me hitting the pad and the orchestra hit starting in tempo, what I actually do is actually step through the sequence. Each note of the sequence will not happen until I actually hit the pad, such as this. And what's interesting is I can also control the dynamics of that as well. So not only the speed, but also the dynamics. Now if you notice, if I stop and wait, the sequence resets itself. Or what I can actually do is have the sequence wait for me. It will wait infinitely. I can get up and answer the phone and go get the newspaper and whatnot, and the sequence will wait for me. So in this case, I've got a bass part sequenced with my bass drum. And I've got a guitar hit with my snare drum. So together I can actually make it sound like I'm playing with a bass player and a guitar player. Finally, a bass player that can play in time. So obviously you can see a lot of the great advantages that we have through that. Now there's one other secret thing that we can do here with our sequence after we get done sequence. I've actually here, I've got my normal drum set configuration. But what I've actually done is I recorded a sequence of a tom-tom roll for each of the tom-toms. So I record those sequences and assign them to the rims of those pads. So listen as I play the head, and then I'll hit the rim and you'll actually hear a roll. So we've got the rolls on the rims of the tom-toms. And it's funny because I spent a lot of time as a kid trying to play fast around the drums when I actually should have been spending time learning how to twirl my drumstick, because now you can twirl your drumstick and do things like that. Now if you get creative with it, you can actually use it in a drum solo and you can start to flip a lot of people out. They'll think they're seeing blind, or you can just tell them that you play so fast that they can't see. So you can work it into your drum solo, something like this. Fun things like that. You can fool all of your friends that way. As you've seen, the possibilities for electronic percussion are almost endless. And I hope this video gave you a good basic understanding of electronic percussion and those creative possibilities that you can do yourself. So in closing, I'd like to play one more number with the band, and thanks for watching.